This is the Weekly Music Business Show, episode number 1 for December 7th, 2015. This week, we talk about Taylor Swift and EDM promoters' inevitable collapse. Neil Peart tells people to get off his lawn. The 2016 Grammy Award nominations are announced, and Adele blows up the planet.
I'm Chris.
I'm Dave Swift, and this is the Weekly Music Business Show. All right, so our first story is Taylor Swift. Again, the charity that this woman can provide never ends. She is now, I think you can take this story multiple ways. She is taking her road crew on a vacation, which could be seen as her keeping her road crew from seeing their families for yet a longer duration of time. They've already been on the road for a couple of years. Oh, you want to go home? Sorry, we're taking you on a vacation. So Taylor Swift, and I don't think there was many more details beyond just what a good woman Taylor Swift is.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I find it, I don't know what your experience has been, but from my experience, I kind of don't want to see these people if I've been with them for a long period of time. Now, this island, Hamilton Island, is off of Australia someplace, or New Zealand someplace. So maybe it's big enough that all 125 members of her crew can, they disseminate and they all get their own private, chateau or whatever. But I kind of feel the same way. It's like, you've been away from your family. But I think there's a really interesting other positive to this. I think, and for the music business, I think this is actually really interesting, and actually any business. Does the crew want this perk? That might be up for question. However, the thing is like, if they do want it, holy crap, she's got like an HR genius, because
absolutely,
I'm like, there's got to be like, before you go to work for the Swifties, they must, like, everybody, I bet you, has to sign off to some degree. Like, hey, I like this person. I think I can get along with them. Otherwise, I don't know how you do this, because I would just be like, nope, actually, I want to be away from humanity, and mostly away from your humanity, But it's interesting for me. It's pretty cool.
I may be a bit too jaded, but I have to think, wow, she posted this on Instagram. So if you really want to do something nice for the people you care about, it's like the celebrities that make a huge charitable donation and then make sure they publicize that everywhere. Just do something nice and shut up about it. Chances are someone will probably report it to the press anyways, and it'll end up making you look better. But no, she has to create a post on Instagram.
I have heard of Katy Perry doing some similar things with her road crew, although usually it just involves like Six Flags,
Yeah. I think when she was in town last in Minneapolis here, she took everyone to a roller skating rink that's nearby. And so, it's like they called and closed down the roller skating rink, and her whole crew came and roller skated for the day.
Dude, did she go to Roller Gardens? Are you referring to Roller Gardens in St. Louis Park?
I think it was Roller Gardens, yeah.
My childhood at St. Louis Park, listening to Jimmy Jam spin the wax. Okay. Dates me, but that's, okay. Great. Taylor Swift. More power to you, or more PR to you. There's a couple letters difference in there.
Yes. All right. So moving on, the EDM festival promoter SFX faces bankruptcy, and I don't think many people maybe have heard that are not inside of the promotion industry have heard of SFX, but they put on just about every major festival that you can possibly imagine, and
at least the ones that involve ecstasy.
Well, they do Rock in Rio. Yeah, I mean, that's no small festival. No. And the thing is, whenever you hear reports about people making money in the industry, it's always, those EDM guys, they're just pulling, whatever producer that I don't remember his name of made X millions of dollars for one night spinning records. And it's like, how can it be that if they're throwing these huge celebrations where people are, spending all this money on booze and entry and everything, that they're not able to stay above float? Is it just the drug costs? Are they that high? I don't know.
The liability insurance. I have a couple thoughts about this. This story doesn't start this year. This story starts back a while ago, and
right.
To me, it all starts with 3 letters, IPO. And anytime entertainment companies go public, they inevitably usually start to experience like really bumpy either periods of time, or they just it kills them. And I don't, from my experience, and I've worked in startups, not for very long now, but long enough to see a lot of things kind of hit these kind of weird walls with capital, is that, investors get involved, and particularly when you get to the IPO level, there's a couple things that happen, and Wall Street's not really concerned about your day-to-day. What they want to see is your quarterly growth. And when you can't hit those numbers, people get twitchy and get edgy. And if you're the biggest dog on the block, and SFX has been, I mean, they're like you said, they're rolling in cash. But when you're the biggest thing that happens all over the planet, where are you going to grow from? Well, you go to acquisition and you start buying up these other little entities or trying to create little entities to get more pieces of the pile coming in. And what ends up happening is nobody is really watching all these moving parts and pieces. And when your acquisition or your investment in terms of R&D outspends your cash, and nobody's really seeing the whole balance sheet, it can get really ugly quick, because people will loan you all the time because they're seeing your reports. We did X millions at Tomorrowland, or, and then you're screwed, because at some point everybody wants their money back, and I tend to be from the standpoint that if and obviously, look, if you are receiving venture capital, you're not listening to us. So, but it actually goes for kind of good guy network investing too, which would be, if you're taking money from, family to make a record, or friends to make a record, or you've got maybe a bigger enterprise that you're trying to do. And I see this a lot of times where guys like open a club, they take over, right, the club that just closed its doors down the street. Unless your investor kind of has an idea about what you're doing, it might not be a good idea to get that investor involved, because it just gets so complicated and they just don't understand. You're not making refrigerators. You're not selling Big Macs. And the idea is that you're going to be able to chart quarterly growth and profit and payback, at X date. And it just doesn't work that way.
So what is the consequence if this goes as bad as feared and SFX files for bankruptcy? What is this going to have a huge impact on electronic dance music? Is this going to have a big impact on the festival world? Or will someone else just bail them out and continue on as always?
Well, I'm not an expert on EDM, but I do know that, EDM artists wield a lot of power. I think there's a lot of parties, their CEO, Sillerman, tried to take this private last year and it didn't go well. And their value just continues to slide in terms of, stock and bond, whatever. I think there's a lot of people who will just wait for this to get ugly enough that it's a fire sale. And then they can, somebody will come in. It doesn't necessarily have to be one entity. You can probably see all. The other thing is, the one thing that SFX has done really well is they don't have centralized control. Each one of these festivals is kind of treated like they're their own little fiefdom. And so there's enough money in there that if it gets broken up, I don't think it's going to signal the end of EDM, because I think EDM is weirdly like this experience that, a younger generation, that's how they experience kind of a corporate music experience. Not corporate in the sense that it's a company, but it's people.
Don't tell them that.
Well, I did meet Tiesto like last February, but it was like nothing, no big deal. But what's interesting to me is I think EDM guys do see things maybe a little bit more as a business, and they don't get so bent on their art, although they are, but it's like, I think EDM is an interesting thing. I think SFX might go bad, but I don't think it says anything bad about EDM.
Yes. So that'll be interesting to see how that story resolves itself. All right. So perhaps we should move along here to probably the most epic news of the day, and that is that drummer Neil Peart has announced his retirement.
Oh,
well, sort of.
Canada. Okay, sorry, I had to get that out.
Well, he kind of did. He left it a little bit like an old man saying, I'm not doing this anymore. But no one really knows whether he means it or not.
Have you seen the images that circulate with this story, by the way? He looks like he's saying, I'm an old man, leave me alone, get off my lawn.
Exactly. Yes, that's a perfect way to sum it up. It's kind of him and his like tooth brace or tooth necklace thing that he's got around his head, and then just kind of slobbishly smashing a stick down towards a cymbal somewhere. Where I'm sure it sounds fantastic in real life because Neil Peart still sounds great.
It's probably in 13 too. You know, it's not. It's definitely not 4/4.
Right. But this makes me think when you look at the list of the highest grossing concert tours of, say, 2015 or 2014, it's almost always acts that are in their 50s, 60s, or even beyond that, you know, the Stones and the Eagles, where you're getting up into, you guys really got to start thinking about retirement. Not so much that you can't cut it anymore, because I don't know, I haven't seen the Stones. I couldn't afford to go see the Stones recently, but they're going to die. I mean, it's just, it's nature, right? It will run its course.
Keith Richards, it's impossible to kill him.
So combining this with the, yes, he is a vampire. We just don't know it. So combining this with the SFX story, and as the general consensus is that all major musicians need to make most of their income from touring, are we going to start to see, well, maybe some availability for arena and stadium tours for new artists? And if so, who are these new artists that can carry that size venue? And additionally, does that mean that maybe as the younger culture gets older, is going to concerts going to become more of something that your parents did?
Wow, those are heavy thoughts. I was just going to ask you, are you a Rush fan?
I feel the same way about Rush that I do about jazz. That I appreciate it for what it is.
Okay.
But I don't go home at the end of a hard night of work and throw on a Rush record and have a cocktail and relax and listen to it. I can appreciate them for their excellent musicianship. And if the right song comes on at the right time, I'll be air drumming right along with everybody else. But I'm not a huge Rush fan. What about you?
You know, I probably feel the same way. I probably like jazz more than I like Rush. I cannot find fault with their musicianship other than I think it's self-indulgent at times. But all of that being said, that's just opinion, right? If you cut me apart, I'm probably more of a pop music geek than I am a lot of other things. Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting. Yeah, the tours that, aside from obviously like the EDM, and then Taylor Swift is going to be an anomaly. But yeah, the classic stuff, it does, and I've used that term lightly, right? But we're talking about acts that made their presence felt in the 70s and 80s, more so now in the 80s, although the Stones are the anomaly there. But even Paul McCartney does well on tour, and he'd be a guy that I still regret that I passed up the opportunity to go see that show. But all in all, being the same, I don't know if legacy acts not being able to perform creates opportunity for other artists. Just because I think that legacy act idea had it's a whole culture. It's not just the act, much the same way we could talk about EDM culture going to shows. But it's like you look at legacy acts and they can fill an arena because that's what their audience expects. And I just don't know if newer, I don't want to say genres, but yeah, kind of, newer live music, I don't know if it could fill rooms the same way these legacy acts could in terms of like a new artist doing it. It's different. And I just don't think that the fans expect it or necessarily appreciate or want it.
Well, that's an interesting perspective, that the fans having a desire for the show to take place in an arena as opposed to a theater or a small club can actually somehow, will that into existence. Well, okay, for example, I believe it was Styx and Journey. They just announced a show at the big basketball arena in town here. And I was really quite surprised to hear that Styx, who I believe is playing the market for the third time inside of 12 months, and then Journey, who is touring, without their original singer and have been on the road relentlessly for, I'm not a huge Journey aficionado, but I know they have been here at least a handful of times in the last half decade or so. So it's, who are these people that continue to shell out money to go to these rather expensive? I mean, I know a lot of people, $200 for a ticket isn't really that big of a deal, but if you've already seen them and you've seen them recently and it's not even the band that you remember, how do they continue? Is it just the songs and the timelessness of it that you want to go relive one more high school night? Or? I
think that has a lot to do with it. And I won't mention names. There is an act here. We are talking in Minnesota, so just to kind of put context around it. But there's an act here in town. Actually, there's a couple acts, but there's one act in particular that does really, really well. And all they are is 80s hard rock tribute shows. And I mean, their guys come out in costume. They have full production, light and pyro and everything. And every event is packed to the gills with people who are just trying to relive high school. I mean, and I don't mean that negatively.
Sure.
The first time I saw this happen on a really big scale at an outdoor thing, it was hilarious to me. And I don't mean hilarious in a negative way. What I mean is that it was like, I saw a bunch of people, older people who experienced this the first time with the real acts, right? So they weren't listening to Twisted Sister, or they weren't listening to people cover Twisted Sister. They were there to see Dee Snider, at whatever show, whatever arena show it was back in the 80s. And their kids have heard these songs, and their kids are now of legal drinking age, and they're all having beers together watching this tribute act, blow up the stage with fire and lights and stand in costume and do Dee Snider. And it is an odd experience, but at the same time, you're like, these people are excited about this musical experience and they're sharing it. I will admit it is a little weird to me, but I think there is something about the audience element has that expectation, which is why like some of these shows, they go into Las Vegas and they continue to perpetuate a very similar experience at one venue night after night, during a week. That's what's really crazy to me.
Well, when you look at a place like Las Vegas, obviously they have a large amount of tourism that's coming through. You go to Las Vegas, you see a couple shows. That's not that unusual. If they're taking up residency at Madison Square Garden, where there's still a decent amount of people coming through. Like, I guess Billy Joel does that. He plays, I believe, like once a month at Madison Square Garden. He's able to sell out that show, and that's what he does for his income. That still is astonishing.
Would you go to that show? Would you go to a Billy Joel show?
Gosh, as a teenager, I would beat up me now as an adult because I thought Billy Joel was a joke. And then as I've matured as a songwriter and as a producer, I listened to Billy Joel's records, and I'm just like, holy camoli. He had some excellent production, some excellent arranging. So yeah, I think I probably would. Just to say that I saw Billy Joel, I think his records are going to stand the test of time.
If you get the chance, take a look at, if you can find footage of the concert they did for Hurricane Sandy benefit. Billy Joel brought the house down. I mean, it was just like, they had all kinds of performers up there, and I swear like he was swinging for the rafters and nailed everything. It was an electric experience. I watched it. I think when he came through locally, I think my sister went and said it was a dynamite show, and I wasn't.
It was fairly recently, right? It wasn't too long ago.
I think it was last summer or the summer before. But I'm not a piano player. I grew up as a guitar playing kid. I can play keys, whatever, blah blah blah. But Billy Joel wasn't like on my highlight reel of like guys I'd go see. However, I had friends who were keyboard players, and he was their idol. So the Billy Joel thing would be an interesting thing to explore. But once it'd be one of those deals. Like I saw James Brown once. That
you did actually.
I saw James Brown. I don't want to date myself as to when, but I did see James Brown at a live show. It was more electric than. It was. He is a performer. Was a performer.
All right.
Rest in peace.
All right, from Neil Peart to James Brown,
dude.
in a few minutes. That's pretty good. So let's move along here. Other breaking news. I think it was just a few hours ago, actually. The Grammy Award nominations came out for 2016. Nothing that really stood out as super surprising. I saw that some people were trying to make a big deal out of Chris Stapleton's nomination for Album of the Year. And, Taylor Swift, Kendrick Lamar, everybody else, The Weeknd got slews of nominations. Nicki Minaj got a few, I think. Anything stand out to you?
There was a point in time where I eyed the Grammys, and now I just kind of don't. I think,
out of curiosity, when did that shift happen? Because I know exactly what happened for me, and I'm curious if it's if we are similar in this fashion.
So once again, I'll date myself a little bit here. I was nominated not for a Grammy. It wasn't, but it was a like a third track Grammy National Award kind of deal as a songwriter in the mid '90s, and I had you begin to kind of understand how that system kind of works. Obviously the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, which is the voting body for the Grammys. Which you have to have worked on or had a release to be a part of, so it is kind of, from and by your peers, although that's loosely put. And you see some of that, and it looked like validation, and then it's just started, I want to say, late 90s for me. I just was like, I checked out, because it was just like, are you kidding me? This is so much crap.
Well, for me, it was when... I believe his name is Neil Peart now. Does that ring a bell? Mm-hmm. He is the guy who always comes on stage at the beginning of the Grammys, and he tells you how bad of a person you are if you steal music. And I think it was about 2001, 2002. Napster had been around for a while. iTunes hadn't really kicked into full swing, and they were laying it on thick, just demonizing, because I think they were all scared for their jobs. And they had the president of the Recording Academy, Neil Peart now, came on stage, and then he repeated that performance. I think it was probably every year for the next 3 or 4 years, giving a very similar speech about how piracy is killing the industry, and you need to buy your records, damn it. That's the way we want it to go. It needs to go that way. Well, Neil actually gave a little interview to Billboard just a little while ago, and he was commenting on the fact about this Chris Stapleton thing, and here's a quote that he said. I know I didn't share this with you before, but I think it's interesting. He said, "I don't think the voters are influenced by TV performance moments or Billboard chart positions. Voters are music makers and professionals in their field. I'm sure they're not voting based on what's being talked about at an award show performance. They're looking at the bigger picture." Yes, because everyone lives in a vacuum and develops their own taste purely by what. So this guy, I think the music industry would do really well if we could. I don't know him personally or know that much about him, but every time he opens his mouth, he kind of turns me off from his organization, which is a pretty prominent organization. It has a lot of pull with pop culture. The nominations get announced, and boom, they're at the top of Twitter. They're at the top of Facebook.
It's a news event.
Everyone wants to talk about it.
It's a news event, definitely.
It's the Super Bowl for music. It's the time of the year where people who don't like talking about music are going to talk about music. And if we can't capture some eyeballs when we have that moment, we're losing huge opportunities. So.
Yeah, I get that, and I would definitely be on the side with you, saying, quit, fix your problem, record business. Don't whine about Napster. Don't whine about piracy. Make it more convenient to do things legally than to pirate. And I think and obviously the music industry did a really poor job about it, and Apple tech guys, haven't figured out Apple and Spotify and others, whatever, and that's a completely other conversation. All that being said, obviously, I think the Grammys are widely influenced a lot by popularity. I think the voting bodies are completely look, the ones that are really working are just like, please don't trouble me with this, and they hand it off to an assistant and they just look for the names that they recognize or that they want to be, associated with. All of that being said, have you listened to the Chris Stapleton record?
I have not. No, I did see the CMA performance, as I'm sure most people did, but
I actually did not see the performance, and I should watch it. But his record is, and this is from a guy who's not a country guy. I'm not a country music guy. It is listening to the Chris Stapleton record. Now I'm referring to Traveler, the most recent release. It is a very, very well written, very bare bones executed. Like, there is no excess on that record. There's nothing. Like, you take away one instrument from some of those arrangements and the whole thing comes out like a house of cards. Everything is just necessity. And I think it's very sincere. And I've seen a couple of small performances that Stapleton has done that have leaked online that are more literally like open mic night things. And I think the guy is seriously legit, as warranted by what he's been able to do, his song placements and stuff. And that'd be awesome. I'd like to see him just wreck shop. But some of these nominations, I'm just like, yeah, it's the usual fodder. Although, Alabama Shakes being up for Album of the Year against Chris Stapleton, I would, be happy with either one of those. I think it's going to be tough to knock off Tay Tay or The Weeknd. Although I think The Weeknd's record is a little flawed, but
I tend to agree with that. And this isn't obviously a music review show, but do you think the Academy would really give Taylor Album of the Year? I mean, she kind of already has them by the gonads, right? I mean,
yeah, and
they're gonna have to. They want the publicity to give it to a Chris Stapleton or Alabama Shakes.
And they did some. They have done some moves recently. I mean, I remember when Arcade Fire, took some awards, right. And that was like, whoa, they got all, Grammys went all hipster. I just don't know if we're in that spot in the cycle. I think honestly, say Stapleton's record might be too. And I don't know when the release date was, and I should check it, but I wonder if it just doesn't have enough heat behind it. But maybe it has enough. Maybe his appearance and with Justin Timberlake, with him, gave him more credibility or something for those guys.
It certainly, quote, went viral when he did that performance on the CMAs. And I believe that was, a little more than a month ago, performing with Justin Timberlake. It's like, that got some shares. It got passed around the internet. It definitely gave him as big a buzz as you could possibly hope for as an artist that most of America doesn't know your name. So just to transition here, I have just added the Chris Stapleton Traveler album to my Apple Music account. I didn't pay for it. I'm an Apple Music subscriber, so I just hit a button and now I can stream it wherever I'd like to. Perhaps we should...
There's no friction in that transaction, is there?
No friction. It's wonderful. It's on my phone now. It's on my iPad. My computer has it. I like that. Now I'm not going to point any fingers because apparently not having that available is working for some businesses. Did you see the big display at the Target? Did you go to the Target and see the big exclusive Adele Target edition there?
No.
Oh, she's got, of course, a Target version because Adele is indie. And she's got her Adele version of the Target with, I think, 3 or 4 bonus tracks. And it's just right by the checkouts. Moms and kids are just putting them in the carts because that's what you get with a loaf of bread. Do you own the Adele record? Chris, did you happen to pick that up?
I actually, and talking about your transition using Apple Music is probably one of the things that doesn't get impacted by this non-streaming policy of Adele's.
That's true.
Because iTunes gives shelter a little bit. I actually downloaded the 25 record or release on iTunes. I did it at the request of, I have a daughter who is in her freshman year at college, and she was like, Dad, I really want to listen to this Adele record, and I can't because it's not available on Apple Music. And she was feeling rather low, so to cheer her up, I said, I can take care of that right now. So I have the record. I have listened to it about 2 or 3 times through because as a record that's that's doing what it's doing right now in terms of sales. I don't want to be ignorant as to what it is, both musically and just, we can talk about, cultural impact, whatever. It's pop culture impact, whatever. But I do have it. And I have listened to it. I'm not necessarily a huge Adele fan. I can respect the crap out of her vocal talent, and I think her craft as an artist and a songwriter, and I think she has a strong identity, which is always, to me, is a huge plus. I don't think she's going to be releasing a record with songs like Teenage Dream, California Girls on it, much to my chagrin. No, I'm teasing there, but so I definitely. And I think this record I think there's a number of reasons why it's successful. I think because it is instantly successful here. I'm not an authority on it, so I can't.
Well, I think you really hit the nail on the head with the identity. That is what makes Adele sell in general. It's interesting because I talk to a lot of people who like music, but maybe are still in their growth phase going through this, because I work with a lot of younger people doing musical things. And I just made it a point last week. I asked every single one of them, hey, did you buy the new Adele record? And it was really interesting. Almost no one knew that it had sold, just a ridiculous amount of copies. And when I told them, they said, well, I saw it at the store, but I didn't, I don't buy CDs anymore. Or I'm not really an Adele fan. It's not really my thing. So, obviously it's hitting some people. She sold 4.4 million copies so far. But what they kept telling me was, why Adele? And when you think about it, she's got 19, she's got, was it 21 and then 25, right? She's telling this story in a way that is unlike what we've seen from artists in like the last 2 decades, where she is saying, here's what I stand for. Here's what I'm all about. You can believe in me. You can connect with me. I look like you. I'm a little prettier than you, but I look a lot like you. Here are my sad songs. Here's my sad story. Believe in me. And you see the growth from record to record. It gets bigger and bigger until this one just explodes because she went away for long enough that people stopped being sick of her. If you recovered from the onslaught of Rolling in the Deep, you're not sick of her any longer, and you're willing to, she's a familiar face, continuing to tell you the same story. It's not like Chris Cornell when he went solo and he put out a couple records and they were all right, and then all of a sudden he put out a dance record that was produced by Timbaland. And it was like, who is this Chris Cornell? I liked Soundgarden Chris Cornell. Give me that Chris Cornell. No, this record, I will admit, I've only made it through it almost once. I didn't make it all the way. It sounds exactly like every other Adele record I've ever heard. And the songs are this kind of quasi acoustic pop thing where it's like, yeah, these are real musicians, but this is a lot of synth bass and programmed drums. And it's not this like natural thing that I think a lot of people want it to be. It's still a nicely produced, manufactured piece of music, like all good records in 2015 are. But, well, it's not 4 dudes and a woman. I shouldn't say dudes. It's not 4 musicians and a singer going into a studio banging out these songs live. Like, I honestly think most people think that's what happens. Like, they still see it in the movies and they think, oh, organic. That's a real singer. Listen to Adele. In fact, I'll shut up and let you answer here, but did you see the SNL track where they, I might have already asked you about this, but did you see the SNL track where they released her vocal without any accompaniment? Like just like the soloed vocal?
No, I haven't seen or heard that.
I'll post it. It went around like I don't really watch Saturday Night Live, but it was probably like a month ago. And she was the musical guest, and she did Hello. And shortly after, it was a leaked recording, and it went around the internet super quick. I saw it probably 15 times in one day on my feed, and people were just gushing about how amazing Adele's voice was. And I had skipped it like the first 10 times, right? Because like, I don't care. I know what a soloed vocal sounds like. And I listened to it and I went, yep, that's what a soloed vocal sounds like. It sounded like someone who can actually sing. It's not like mind-blowing. She's a good singer. She's, I think we should expect that our artists practice their craft, can sing in tune. I think that was what's shocking for most people is she could sing in tune. There wasn't a lot of auto-tune artifacts. There was places that I actually probably would have pitched it if she were tracking with me. But that's because that's how we're conditioned as humans now to go, oh, that didn't sound fake. Or that was, So, why Adele? Why is Adele the artist in your mind that can sell 4.4 million records in 14 days? That's insane.
Yeah, and I think the thing though is you have to excuse my interruption here.
It's all good.
All right. Oh yeah, this is reality. This is
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I looked at what her numbers were on her previous record, and what's funny is that so far, like she's the sales leader for the decade. Her previous records did really well 2 years in a row. Like of 21, her previous record. In 2011, she did 5.8 million for the year, and then in 2012, the same record sold an additional 4.4 million.
Wow.
And that's over a 12-month period. So I think at this point, Adele is a brand that people like you mentioned. You pick up the Adele record with the bread. I think she's a force to be reckoned with. I think there is maybe. What was interesting is just over the weekend, I was doing a couple things here in the studio, and I like to just turn on something while I do stuff like, pack up mic cables and move mic stands and get set for whatever's next. And I turned on a Zane Lowe interview with Rick Rubin at Shangri-La. Fascinating. It's a great piece. It's up on YouTube. Just Zane Lowe, Rick Rubin, Shangri-La, and you'll get a good result. And he talks about working with Adele, and I respect the crap out of Rick Rubin's process. And I don't know, obviously, like her latest record, she's got some Max Martin content on there and that kind of stuff.
It's required by law.
Yeah.
You're going to sell 1 million records, yeah. Max has to be on it.
Yes, Max Martin. God dang that guy. What did I do wrong that I'm not living his life? Anyway, but I kind of feel the same way about this record in terms of I'm not sure that every song on it is that great. And I actually kind of got tired of hearing the sad story thing. Like, it was fatiguing to me. There's one song on there that I was like, I don't know if you get this week. There are times, and not so much on the last couple Taylor Swift records, but there was a Taylor Swift record where it was like anytime one of my daughters was playing it in the car, I would like want to skip over some things because I'm like, I'm a dad and I don't like hearing this. I can't imagine her dad cringing about what she's sharing. Not that it was like a Halsey record where she's talking about blah, but it was like, it was like, geez, you're sharing a little too much information here. Makes me just kind of want to, cringe a little bit. I think generally the public appreciates that kind of what they take for open honesty. So I think there's some things to be said for that. I think I don't know if it's her label, XL Recordings, or if it's her that's driving some of the business decisions, but I think they just were really smart about a bunch of things. I think timing with this record, I don't think that you can do this same amount of sales in June, July, or August, or even April and May. And I would even guess that you can't get outside of the fourth quarter and do this kind of sales velocity. It's interesting, but I think that's a decision. And then obviously the windowing thing is kind of I think it's a valid point. The fact that this is not available on streaming services, probably helped contribute to sales. I think it's a good decision. I think it's good for the record business in a way. But only the Adeles and the Taylor Swifts can benefit from that practice. And hopefully the benefit that it reaps for the record labels, potentially, if they're not dumb, which is saying a lot, is that it kind of puts some funds in their coffers, but that also that it makes them take a step back and look at, you know, how they're practicing their business. Are we signing artists that have an identity? Are we just cranking out pop commodity crap and losing money on it because we're trying to turn the stuff out so fast that we're looking at cash flow and not long-term investment?
All right, so what you said was that what Adele did, and just to make sure I'm hearing you right, what Adele did was best for the music business. Now, one of the articles that was posted shortly after this was announced by Bob Lefsetz said that what Adele is doing is greedy and it's getting in the way of what is right for consumers, which, you know, most businesses would believe if you're doing what's right by consumers, that's going to be in the end, in the long game, what is right for the business. So how can, let's break this down a little bit and try to just analyze for a second. How is it that windowing works so well for movies and television shows, but it can reap such negativity anytime that an artist does it? Why is it such a different experience for people? Do you have any opinions on that?
Well, you know, I have a couple ideas, and look, I follow Bob Lefsetz, and he is my favorite music thinker, commentator, cranky old guy, right? And Bob tends to see the world in I can be very polar, but Bob makes my polarity like even more, like he makes me look really gray, right?
Yes.
And I think Bob is looking, you know, guys like Bob Lefsetz, and there's some others too. What's the former the CEO, the former Ticketmaster CEO who commented about this too, had some.
Oh, that's Nathan Hubbard.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I actually had a hard time making it through. Well, that's a different topic, but I had a hard time making it through that post because he leaped into ticket sales so quickly away from the Adele record. I was like, what the
Not
hell?
only that, but his leaping into ticket sales had nothing to do with Adele because she's doing it all on Songkick, which is going directly to the customer, right? So
Absolutely.
they cut secondary markets out, which is, I think, another really great thing. So how come Adele can do, why is it good for Adele, or why do artists get reaped, you know, would just get killed when it comes to windowing? I think it comes from the fact that there's just confusion in the marketplace. You know, you're like you said, everybody expects that The Force Awakens is not going to be available at Netflix the day that it shows up in theaters.
Right.
In fact, I don't think anybody expects it to be on Netflix for a long, long time.
If ever, right? I mean,
Right.
those properties are very valuable. Now, Star Wars may be an exception, but there's also the repeat factor. Unless you're a toddler, which I have small children, and they will watch one show 15 times in a row, no problem. But most people don't want to watch a television show, the same episode, say, more than once per year or per lifetime. So there is a really big difference in the way that people consume music. They consume it in a repeat fashion. You've already listened to the Adele record a few times. My favorite records I've probably listened to hundreds of times. I'm sure you're no different. So how is it that a service such as Netflix, Hulu, there's dozens of them out there now that license content in bulk, provide a fee to the content creator, and are able to generate a profit so that their company is happy and the happy and the companies that are creating the video products are happy and able to continue creating products. How is that a business model when video is so much more expensive to produce and we're paying more or equal to for just audio, which, you know, most of these records, let's be honest, even the Dr. Luke stuff, the Max Martin, they're doing it with one $2,000 channel strip and a Mac. This is not $1 million production anymore. You know, if they rent out a big studio, they're using one channel on that SSL. So the content is cheap to create. It shouldn't have a huge budget beyond the marketing point of it, which is, you know, 99% of where their budgets are coming from. But if you just put it into the streaming channels, they will do the advertising for you, such as HBO allowed the cable channels to do all throughout the 80s and 90s and into until they started off on their own. How is it that we've not been smart enough as musicians to go, hey, we don't really need this existing system? I think the Adele situation really, both Nathan and Nathan Hubbard, the Ticketmaster CEO, and Bob Lefsetz kind of have points in that, hey, these artists, Taylor and Adele together, I think I saw some stat somewhere, they made up like 42% of all music sold last week. Two artists, two women made up 42% of the entire music economy. So when are they going to step up and say, we're not really doing this just to become the rich, they're not going to be like maybe they do want to become Bill Gates, retire, and then become philanthropists. But why don't they just take care of their own and find a way to make this system last?
Yeah, I can see, I can definitely see where we look at this, and I'm going to throw out a term here, and it's not meant to be derogatory. It is what it is. Kind of a communist system or a socialist system where, and honestly, entertainment companies have always been socialist. There's always like a one breadwinner who's subsidizing the work of 100 things that aren't working or aren't earning money. In Taylor Swift's defense, she kind of shares with her fans the stuff that she listens to. And I know, in a couple of cases, that's made good weeks or good months for a number of artists, when she's like, I love this record. And, or she'll Instagram a picture of, a handwritten note about, well, these are the last 2 things or the last 10 things in my playlist.
So what you're saying is you follow Taylor Swift's Instagram in excruciating detail.
Yeah. I live and die by those cat photos or kittens. No, I don't. When I can, I leave Twitter open and I have a number of things that are in lists that I follow, and that came up, and it was just one of those things where it was like, hey, this is an interesting thing that obviously someone who doesn't need to do is doing. In terms of Adele, I think she might be taking some heat that might not be her decision. XL Recordings, which is, in my eyes, a pretty good record label, a pretty old school record label in the fact that they don't sign trash. They're not concerned about hits. They only release like a half dozen records a year. And they're not concerned about, being pop commodities. They're doing a great job of, with their artist roster and doing some things. They might have pulled the trigger on this and said, we're not going to stream this. Might have been out of Adele's hands. I don't know. Do they have a responsibility to take care of their own? I actually think that like the record industry just needs triage right now. And Adele and Taylor Swift might just be triage. Like just stop the bleeding. And, in after the first of the year or after the first quarter is underway, let's talk about better practices. And I don't think windowing is entirely a bad thing for artists. Obviously, it's not going to work for a lot of people, the majority of people. If you're listening to this podcast, don't window your release. If you're a musician, right, you're trying to, you want to reduce friction for people to get your music, not make it harder for them. However, at the same time, I think if you're at the top of the food chain, windowing might actually be good for the whole ecosystem. And obviously 4.5 million records, 4.5 million people were willing to buy that record at least $10.99.
Right.
That's huge. That hasn't happened in so long.
Ever, actually.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. We can, if you look back, obviously, 10 million copies for NSYNC in 2000. Eminem did 7.6 million in 2002. Usher did 7.9 million in 2004. Those numbers we haven't seen in so long that maybe this restores a little bit of faith, in record sales. I'm not, I think for the public, there's a lot that needs to be reestablished, but I think I'm not so quick to pull Adele over the coals on this, or Taylor Swift.
Okay, so I'll take the jaded perspective on that. don't you think it's going to do, I mean, this was on the news, right? So don't you think it's going to do a little bit of, well, the average person, the average American that I run into knows that the music industry is struggling, right? They know a little bit like, oh, there's no money in music, but they don't really care, right? They're not going out of their way to fix it. If they see a news story that says, wow, this artist just sold 3.4 million records in 1 week and then 1.1 million the next week, or whatever the numbers were, they're going to kind of go, wow, maybe the music industry is recovering. Things might not be that bad. Is that going to make it harder for musicians to convince people that they're not already adolescents that just refuse to grow up and get jobs? Or I don't know. I think it could actually do some damage to the idea that that we need to find a new revenue source. It's not going to go back to records. We know it's not going to go back to records. So perhaps what Lefsetz was saying is, consumers have already spoken. They really don't like having physical media. In fact, I personally threw out all my CDs in like 2003 and just ripped them and, gave them away or something. I hate having things. I have too much clutter as it is. So I wasn't about to go buy this CD. I don't even have an optical disc, just like Lefsetz. How would I play it? What we need to do is figure out, well, hey, YouTube is showing ridiculous amounts of ad revenue. Where is that ad revenue going? How is Spotify at a, $11 million, billion dollar valuation? Where is their ad revenue going to? They're not showing a profit either. So I just have an inkling, just guessing, that a lot of the money that the music industry is complaining about not seeing, they're actually getting and not sharing with the artists. That would be my guess. They don't seem to be, struggling in terms of they're not reducing the pay of executives. People aren't exactly losing their jobs left and right as the public might believe. But eventually it's got to collapse, right? Maybe.
I think those are all. I think they are fair points in terms of, especially with record companies, right? There is an issue. There's an issue with does income get to artists? The hard thing is that is a classic problem going all the way back to the Beatles and further.
True, but we haven't had a chance to solve it until now. Right? We have the means now. We didn't have it with the Beatles.
So correct. We didn't have it. But the hard thing about it is there still isn't, and not that there can't be, and maybe what it's going to take is Taylor Swift picks up her pen again and writes, a letter, Dear Apple, please help me, compensate my artist friends and myself better by offering a direct service. The thing is that Apple already does offer a direct service. They have this thing called iTunes Connect, and anybody can upload their content to iTunes Connect, and they're able to share that via the Apple Music ecosystem.
Well, that's kind of their cheesy social network, isn't it? You can't charge for anything on iTunes Connect. That's all free content.
It's free content. However, everybody has to, the thing is, I guess the point that I'm trying to get across here is there still isn't, like the earlier point I made, there's confusion in the marketplace.
Absolutely.
And so until there's like a practice that gets established,
which is why Lefsetz is actually kind of right here, and so is Hubbard. We need these huge artists to step up and say, look, I've had an amazing, successful career. I've got the old system backed behind me, but now we need to take a look at the future. We need a Steve Jobs. We need an Elon Musk who is willing to say, I've got $100 million. I'm going to build a rocket company, and I'm going to put all $100 million into going to Mars. And someone just dumps their entire fortune into finding a way to solve a problem that they see as big enough for their entire livelihood, their entire legacy to exist. And until we see an artist really stand up and lay it out and clarify for the masses where the problems are, I think we're just going to continue to see pundits ranting and, people like us. Actually, more so, what bothers me is the tech pundits, because they just think, oh, this is a problem for the musicians. They just need to start touring more. They're not good business people. Just subscribe to Spotify and then go buy a t-shirt, right? I mean, that's the old saying. Then you see Adele selling 4.4. Oh, the economy's recovered. We're doing just fine. So it's
well, I work with tech guys, and I have exposure to guys in those circles, and the tech side of things is not as, yes, guys at the top are doing amazing, but there are a lot of guys that are just there are a lot of guys that are like cranking out iOS apps because they just love it, and they're doing it for the craft of what they're doing, and they're not necessarily. I don't know that they're making the comments about the music business being. I think a lot of people recognize that the system is really broken. I'm not sure how much public perception impacts that positively or negatively. And I'm willing to completely admit that maybe I'm wrong. I kind of am in a weird standpoint where I'm like, I think if the public if 4.5 million people were willing to go and buy an Adele record somehow, I think that it reintroduces the importance of music to them. And so in some way, Adele she is helping, but like I said, it's triage right now, and there's gotta be, a couple other big releases, and maybe it's somebody like Rick Rubin or XL Recordings that go, you know what, here's the deal. This is what we're going to do. And this is why we're innovators as a label. And, it is a really pervasive problem. The other side of this thing that we haven't really brought up or mentioned, and because we kind of ragged on the piracy thing, it's, in terms of the record industry wringing its hands about piracy for a long time and really blaming their customers for their business practice problems. In terms of using piracy to say that's why the business is screwed up. The other side of it is we do have a generation that is not used to paying for music. I don't know what that generation represents as a percentage of Adele's sales. That would be an interesting number to find out.
That would be a very interesting statistic.
Because
it could be the first record that 3 million people have ever bought, and maybe the only one they ever will. Be a little bit.
I'm not sure.
More doom and gloom about it.
I'm not sure about that. I would tend to think that, if people, because look, this could be the first record really since number one, it's easier to stream music than to pirate it.
Unless it's not available for streaming. But there is like a market for downloadable content called Apple Music or iTunes, right? Sure.
That wasn't available when No Strings Attached did 10 million copies in 2000, right? So the thing is maybe this gets a generation of potential music buyers familiar with, oh, I didn't realize that this app could actually do that with this music that maybe I couldn't get on the streaming side, and maybe it was actually easier for me to do that than to buck through this whole, because Apple Music works. Apple Music needs to be broken up into about 20 different apps. It's convoluted and difficult, and they make the experience harder than it needs to be. All that being said, if it familiarized somebody with that buy button and they realized that experience wasn't so painful, maybe it's not so bad. Does Adele have a responsibility? Does she have an opportunity? Yes. Is it a responsibility? I don't know. That's me speaking.
Yeah, I mean, no one really knows. If we knew the answer and if we could fix it, we would. Now, I'll just say that while you were talking, I went to this little website, you probably never heard of it, youtube.com, and I typed in Adele 25 full album, and I found 3 or 4 playlists here that have the entire record available for streaming that are not, legitimate, and I'm sure they'll get pulled down in a day or two. But for now, I could listen to the entire record. And
YouTube is a bigger animal
yeah.
than Spotify and Apple Music combined.
Anyone with kids will tell you, they don't, unless their parents have set them up with an Apple Music or a Spotify account, kids just go to YouTube. And even if they do have that account, they're probably just going to YouTube anyway to stream their music, to find
not just
new
kids,
artists.
Adults. I get all the time, I'll get an email with, here's 8 songs that we're going to perform on blah, blah, blah. And, and there might be links to legit files, and then there'll be a YouTube link, to something.
Sure.
And it always angers me because I'm not angry, but it's just like, oh man, that's not convenient.
It's frustrating.
For me to put this into a playlist, because now that sits in this other thing that I can't centralize.
And the quality is so-so. I mean, it can be
range.
Great,
yeah.
But often, especially for something like the Adele thing, in order to surpass the copyright protection, they'll change the pitch, right? They'll speed it up or slow it down a little bit. I don't know if you've encountered that, but they definitely do it. They'll just to change it enough so that it fools whatever algorithm goes through and checks the audio for copyright infringement. And it's for someone who's learning a song, a musician, or if you have perfect pitch or the key of the song, it can be infuriating to listen to.
Or it's like, this is faster than I think I've heard it before.
Yes.
I really don't understand why. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about those people? Like, why would you do that? I guess the allure is there for some, but yeah, and YouTube is obviously Google. Talk about Google with YouTube, and this is a subject for another discussion, but YouTube Red is the screwiest thing on the planet for me as a business model. I don't get it at all. It's a weird experiment, or they have some data that says something that I just don't quite understand, because Google is an advertising company. YouTube is an advertising monster. And then why would you want people to pay a subscription service to take out the biggest piece of your puzzle, which is, the one thing that you deliver, which is ads, aside from, the content and whatnot. So that's Google could be, I don't want to say Google, Alphabet, YouTube, YouTube, could play a really important piece to this puzzle as well. But from Google's history, I just don't think that they're motivated to really do anything about it. And record labels are just kind of happy to get whatever scraps they get out of that arrangement. It's just
Absolutely.
Weird. It's weird.
I agree with you about YouTube Red. It's they've got too many products now too. And if you notice that, they've got Google Music, Google Play Music, YouTube Red, YouTube Music. There's like 7 different apps that are all kind of included when you sign up for the one. It's like, I think Google as a company just needs to start talking to each other divisions.
Yeah. And I don't even know if those services are integrated, right? Like if you get something in one spot, does it show up in the other? Does it not? I have a Google Play account because I had to download a movie for something, and for whatever reason, it wasn't available through iTunes channels, and just the worst process in the world. It was just like emails and this and that and verified and blah, blah, blah. And even now, like, I can't even get the damn thing to open. Now it's like, we watched this movie once, and now I can't even get back into the account. So yeah, Google's an interesting animal, completely not unlike the music business in some ways, but yeah.
Well, what I was kind of hinting at with this is that Google and YouTube pretty much own the music business. The numbers I'm able to find right now are $4 billion in ad revenue from YouTube in 2014. So I'm sure that number has increased substantially by 2015.
Facebook, by the way, on the ad side is really gaining. Is gaining very, very quickly over Google, especially for 2015. So you could toss Facebook into this equation too.
Well, the reason I think YouTube is so important for musicians is that that's where musicians go to listen to, or where people go to hear music, right? People will find I think it's really interesting. The Facebook thing, you see what you see on Facebook for music is not interest is like, oh, I'm going to go listen to this record on Facebook. It's, hey, look at this 6-year-old. He can play drums really good. And then it's like you watch it for 6 seconds and you go to something else. But on YouTube, people are doing that. They're curating playlists and they're living inside of that that atmosphere. That's their only music experience. And if YouTube is making, say, $4 billion in ad money, and then they're half of that, let's say, and it's probably honestly more than that, half of that's coming from musicians. That's $2 billion that is going to record labels that I don't believe any, as far as I know, there are no record contracts that account for revenue sharing from ads on streaming sites. So all of that money, $2 billion that we know of, could have been in the pockets of artists somewhat, but zero. It all goes. So that's why the labels want to promote YouTube. The labels they're Vivo. I mean, that's a huge effort amongst all the labels because they're just making buckets of cash and not having to pay the artist. They found an even better way to continue to screw the artists. So Adele found a way to overcome that, and which did give her and her label a great big. It's interesting that Taylor and Adele are not on indie labels, but they're not signed directly to Sony or directly.
Correct.
So XL and Red and
Big Machine,
right?
Yep.
Yeah. That is, it's very coincidental that would come about.
You think?
Yeah.
It's certainly, it certainly says something about artist control or artist involvement. Maybe not control. In terms of some of those things. And, and the back end of this conversation in terms of, yes, their projects might not be available on streaming today, but they will, there's a point in which their sales revenue goes below what their streaming revenue can become. And that's when it's that point that they can best predict, that's when they'll push that, availability into a streaming, category. But by then, the whole planet might have a copy of 25. I don't know. You're gonna see kids.
Good for you, Adele. I don't want to be an Adele hater. I think it's nice to hear someone who can sing, can sell some records. Makes me feel like it's the '90s again.
At least 2000, maybe, right?
Right.
Yeah, they're definitely, obviously, everybody wants to have a model, right? And I think it's Scott Borchetta who's he's the CEO or the president at Big Machine Records. And he's got a big initiative about paying for, not having free music and paying for this stuff. All of that being, despite everybody saying, pay for this music, I think it's one of those deals where it's like, I think the public is saying, give us a system that is easier to get into, right? Give us a system that is and then on the other side, artists and labels need to say, hey, look, this is a different paradigm and we need to kind of change all of our accounting, right? We got to do a much, and there was some conversation not too long ago about being able to tie, like literally, to tie digital blockchains into audio plays, into file plays, where there'd be no accounting because it would all be basically like, this is, this gets played and this shows up, in servers someplace. That's how it works. I don't think that we're anywhere near that. I don't know what it's going to take, but if it's total collapse of the record industry, maybe. And if that's the case, then Adele's doing us all a disservice because it just perpetuates, the model that exists right now. There's pros and cons on every side of the argument, but it is a broken system.
It's definitely a broken system. Well, I think we have shed a little illumination. I know I feel a little bit clearer about how I feel about Adele after. So, I mean, it's a good conversation, and it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve in terms of what her. I mean, she is showing to go through Songkick, sell her tickets directly to fans, take care of her. I mean, it's really something you got to do in 2015. You got to give good customer service. You got to show your fans that you care about them. So I want to believe that it's not just a marketing ploy, and that she's not just pulling a Swiftie and taking her road crew on a vacation or sending them Christmas presents like she did last year. That was a great YouTube video. If you haven't seen that, Google Taylor Swift sends fans Christmas presents.
Oh, yeah, I've heard all about them.
She is the king of those PR moves to make her look like the most generous person in the world, and that makes people buy records.
I think I'm willing to put a little more sincerity into Taylor Swift's efforts, because honestly, I just don't know, and I don't mean this negatively. I think Taylor Swift, she must be pretty smart on some levels. I don't know that she's like sinisterly smart. I do know that,
but her parents are. Her father
she's got sinister blood in her genes. It's just going to take a minute to manifest.
But I think she gets some advice from her parents, right? Her father is a manager for a giant mutual fund. Her mother was like king of advertising. I mean, she definitely has some, hey, Dad, I need to have a little talk about what to do with my Instagram followers. She has some good advice that she can go to make sure that, I think you're right. I think she probably is a good person, because it feels good to be a good person unless you're like a sociopath. It feels good to take care of people, and it feels good to get that gratification back. And it also so happens to be that it's really good for her career, and it makes everyone want to buy really expensive Taylor Swift tickets and buy her CDs and believe that she is a wonderful artist. And I'm not saying that she's not, but because she has that leverage now, she can do all those wonderful things. And it would be nice to see her doing those wonderful things that benefits us all.
Well, she did get Apple, with one Tumblr post, did get Apple to double back on their royalty paying for the intro period.
Now go after YouTube, Taylor. Go after YouTube.
Taylor Swift, if you're listening to this podcast, and you know what, there's a good chance that you might be, we just have a couple things for our Christmas list.
Well, hey, there's 125 people that are going to be on vacation looking for new podcasts to listen to. Maybe one of them will stumble upon it.
Oh, yeah. That would be amazing. If you're on Taylor Swift's road crew, tell me where I can send my application.
I know a guy who knows his drum tech, so I'll get on that.
Good. Well, I know some people that are label, but I think that's a favor too far to ask.
Oh, see, you just don't have you have more self-respect than I do. I think that's what I'm going for. All right. Well, I think that's going to conclude the very first episode of our little podcast here, the Weekly Music Business Show, WMBS. BS all the time.
All the hits, day and night. All the BS you can handle.
Anything you want to plug, Chris? Do you want to talk about any of your day job? Anything you want people to go check out?
You know what? If you want to, you can take a look at me over at Twitter. I'm at Drew Chowen. That's DREWCHOWEN. Yes, it's a play on Minneapolis street names, and that's all the more I'm going to say about it.
I had no idea. I was actually, when you brought it up, I was going to ask you, so I won't interrogate you.
There's a ton of confusion that happens. Like I will get messages sometimes from people that go, "Hey, Drew," and I got to chuckle, but it.
Yeah, I think when I found you on you do the like link up things for your Facebook people, go to your Twitter people, and I was like, who's this Drew guy? I don't know anyone.
Yeah. Well, if you're a fan of the city of Minneapolis, there's more to this than Prince and the Replacements, and sometimes you just got to dig a little bit deeper.
There is Soul Asylum.
Oh my gosh, I could tell you some Soul Asylum stories.
I would love to hear that. All right, well, I am at Dave Swift on Twitter. David Swift, excuse me. I don't know my own Twitter handle. At David Swift on Twitter, and I guess that is this week's inaugural episode of WMBS.
Woohoo! Thanks for listening, folks.